All right, guys, so these are the two practice problems on purchasing power parity that were in the slides. Really, these are actually great practice problems just for understanding how exchange rates fluctuate in regards to price, and how changes in price also then, or changes in exchange rate affect net exports. Purchasing power parity is not really a tested topic, and not a topic that we need to worry too much about, though it is pretty useful in the real world. You'll see a lot of like GDP equations calculated in purchasing power parity so that we can understand the dollar value of something in Europe, assuming prices were equivalent to each other. But really, I think this is most useful, again, to understanding how exchange rates affect where people buy things, affect net exports, and vice versa, how net exports affect exchange rates. So first problem here, we've got Nike shoes that cost $150 in the United States. They cost 600 pounds in England, and we've got a current exchange rate of 3 pounds to a dollar. And so the first question is, where would I rather buy the shoes? Well, there are two kind of easy ways to approach this. Think first if you were in the United States and you have $150 to buy the shoes, and you took your $150 to England, right? Well, when I take my $150 to England, I'm going to get 3 pounds per dollar, which means I'm going to get 450 pounds. And my immediate thought is that in the United States, $150 bought me shoes, but in England, I am now short 150 pounds to buy shoes. In other words, I can't buy shoes. So where would I, as an American, rather buy my shoes? Well, I'd rather buy them in the United States, where my $150 gets me shoes, but that doesn't work in England. The other way is, think if you were in England, if you had 600 pounds and you were trying to buy shoes in England, 600 pounds buys you shoes, but you take your 600 pounds to the United States, and every dollar in the United States gets divided, or every pound gets divided by 3 to become dollars. So I would have, my 600 pounds would become $200, right? 600 pounds divided by 3 becomes $200. $200 means I have more money than needed to buy shoes in the US. So I would much rather, if I had pounds, turn my pounds into dollars, because really I could get a $150 pair of shoes and I could have 50 bucks left over to buy something else, or I could buy more shoes if I needed. Both of these things are showing us that the preference of almost everybody would be to buy in the United States, where after we transition, right, where after we exchange, US shoes are cheaper. It's not easy to see that immediately when we just look at these numbers, but it is easy to see it when we deal with exchange rate. So next question, well, what's that going to do on an exchange rate market? So we can draw a quick exchange rate market. I'm going to use the dollar here. So on the vertical axis, we'd have pounds per dollar, and on the horizontal axis, we'd have the quantity of dollars. And we know that we're starting at an exchange rate of 3 pounds per dollar, and that gives us Q1, right? But what we know is that everybody wants to buy shoes in the United States because including this exchange rate, shoes are relatively cheap. So the preference for US products begins to increase. Demand 2, we shift it to the right, and the value of the US dollar will increase. In fact, it should increase all the way up to 4 pounds per dollar, right? So we're going to see an increase in demand for dollars because people want American shoes. Which is going to lead to an appreciation of the dollar, right? So those are our two starting points in purchasing power parity. How would this exchange rate then affect net exports from Europe, aka to the United States? This one is where things get a little bit tricky and we begin to see kind of the looping nature of these things of exchange rates here. But what we begin to see is as the dollar increases in value, aka as the dollar appreciates, the cheap shoes no longer look cheap, right? As people buy more and more dollars to go get shoes that are cheaper, eventually the price of the dollar is going to go up enough that the discount we were previously getting doesn't exist anymore. And if they no longer look cheap, then US exports to Europe will begin to decline. And European imports of shoes from the US will begin to increase, right? In other words, we can say that net exports in the United States will begin to go down, because really the only reason people were buying the shoes in the United States is because the shoes were cheaper in the United States when the exchange rate was kind of what we would call out of sync with the idea of purchasing power parity. But as we approach parity, the need to buy shoes in the United States goes away. The reason for buying shoes in the United States begins to go away. And the United States will see fewer exports of shoes than they previously did. So we get the most kind of basic concepts here. The dollar appreciated because people want to buy in the United States. And the appreciation of the dollar is going to lead to a decrease in net exports. As one added point here, another reason there will be a decrease in net exports is if the dollar is more valuable, then US citizens will be able to buy more European goods, or in this case, British goods. Right? We can go beyond shoes for a moment. We can think, well, now that a dollar buys you 4 pounds, it's way cheaper as an American to go somewhere else. In other words, the imports for the United States will begin to increase, and that, of course, will decrease net exports. So that's problem number 1 on how we can use purchasing power parity to kind of learn these lessons of exchange rates. Problem number 2 is somewhat similar, just approaches it from a slightly different angle. In Japan, a phone costs 200 yen. In the United States, a phone costs $100. If these are representative goods of what we can see, then we have a really quick equation. What would we expect the exchange rate to be? Well, you could do 200 yen divided by $100 tells us that it should be 2 yen per $1. So an exchange rate of 2 yen to $1 is what we expect the exchange rate to be at the moment, right? The other way to say this, right? $1 should buy 2 yen, right? That's what the exchange rate should be in this scenario. If the exchange rate, though, at the moment is 3 yen to a dollar, what would begin to happen in these net exports? What would we think should happen? There's a lot of different ways that you could approach this problem, but I like to do it simply by kind of translating these sentences and these ideas and putting them together. $1 should buy you 2 yen, but right now $1 buys me 3 yen, right? $1 buys 3 yen. So the dollar is overvalued. If I were holding dollars, right? Let's say we could go back to the example we did before. If I was holding 100 US dollars, right now I could turn that 100 US dollars, could multiply that by 3 yen per dollar, and I could turn that into 300 yen, and 300 yen would be a phone plus 100 extra yen, right? A phone that costs 200 yen plus 100 extra yen. So the dollar is overvalued. And so people are going to go out and they're going to try and get yen because those yen are going to buy them more stuff. So we're going to see demand for the yen will increase because people will be demanding Japan's goods, right? In the US, this means that imports will increase, exports will decrease, and we can say that net exports will all decrease, right? People are demanding Japanese goods, so all of those things are happening simultaneously, right? That's what this exchange rate, which is an kind of the wrong exchange rate under purchasing power parity, will do to the level of trade between these countries. And the last part here is just a continuation of the same thing. If we get to 300 yen and $200 as phones, we can do the same thing. Yen 300 divided by dollars 200 means that the exchange rate should be 3 to 2. What we could really say is that 1.5 yen should equal $1, right? Or $1 should buy 1.5 yen. But then the question, of course, becomes, will that actually happen, or what will happen to the trade again? And this will lead to the same outcome. Even if we got to 2 yen to $1, we're still not far enough. So we would again see an increased demand for yen as Japanese goods look cheap. And as those prices change, people respond to those price changes. 2 yen to $1 was a good exchange rate in the original market, but when prices change, people's behavior changes again. So prices doubled in the United States, but they only went up 50% in Japan, right? Another way to think of this, right? That's a 50% increase, whereas in the United States, that's a 100% increase in the cost of phones. So naturally, people would gravitate towards that 50% increase, which creates another demand for yen, and the yen would eventually appreciate to 1.5 to $1 instead of 2 to $1, or originally that 3 to $1. Again, all of these concepts are not really going to be tested, but they are about the idea of, can you play with how exchange rates interact with each other? Can you see how price leads to exchange? Can you see how exchange rates affect purchases, affect net exports and trade? Purchases, trade, net exports, and how there's a little bit of a cycle to that, right? Price affects exchange rate, the exchange rate affects trade, and that's really what purchasing power parity is showing us. So this is all just kind of a little bit of depth to add to our understanding of net exports and how these things interact with each other.